Thank you very much indeed, Corny. I'm actually just wondering, does anyone have a question for Corny or Earl? If you'd like to raise your hands? Any questions? Come on, don't be shy. Oh, we have a question at the very back. We can get a mic to him. I'm going to ask either one of you to come back up on stage.
Yeah, John Wetmore with pedestrians.org. We have these wonderful agreements come out at the international level. How do they translate to action at the national level or the local level where people don't necessarily follow everything that the UN says?
I think that's a challenging question. I think that if we go back to some of the things that I said in the presentation, the fact that we have these agreements now is in part because there is this groundswell of support. So it's not, some of these agreements, and the climate change agreement I think is a very good example, is not a traditional top-down agreement where government leaders say, they sit in a small room and they decide on a 2-degree scenario and they say you need to do this, this, this and this. They tried this in 2009 in Copenhagen when they were trying to come to an agreement to the follow-up to the Kyoto Protocol, and that failed miserably because countries said we do not want to have this agreement forced upon us. And so what happened over the last 6 years, between 2009 and 2015, is that countries worked on processes within their own countries. And they say, like, in the case of climate change, this was an instrument called nationally determined contributions, where countries actually, before the agreement was reached in Paris, that they say, look, we are doing our homework. This is what we can do in terms of mitigation of climate change. This is what we can do in terms of adaptation to climate change. So that people were sensitized and people were aware of it. And as a consequence, there was a certain level of comfort by the government leaders to actually come up with such an ambitious agreement. So that's one part of the story. It's obviously not enough. What needs to be done next is it's really, you could say, it's a mass mobilization of effort. And we need to bring on board the governments, national and local governments. We need to bring on board the private sector. We need to bring on board the civil society. And it's fascinating to see that in a number of cases, and renewable energy is actually a very good example, that it's no longer the government which is imposing, but it is the private sector which is leading, because they have invested so much in R&D that the price of 1 kilowatt of electricity generated by wind or solar in many cases is cheaper than a kilowatt generated through coal-fired power plants. If we look at transport, I was reading something last night coming over here. The expectation is that by 2020 that it will be cheaper to buy an electric car than a diesel car. So that, and as a consequence, that the diesel manufacturers are starting to phase out diesel models and that they are starting to ramp up the number of electric models. Like Toyota is launching a new car, or they launched it this week or last week, and they did not even went to the trouble of having a diesel model. They said that is out. So by having the situation that the private sector is able to incorporate it and they say this is good business, then we are making progress. But it's definitely not going to be easy, because what happens in the wider context, if all the cars in Beijing would be electric, we would have clean congestion. So it is very much clear that we're not just doing this from a climate perspective. We're doing this for an integrated set of objectives. We're doing this also for sustainable development, for road safety. We're doing this for air pollution. We're doing this for a whole range of solutions. And I think that by mobilizing all these different communities, and that is what we're starting to see, that the transport objectives are no longer just represented by the transport community, but that the urban community, that the health community, and that this is also something which makes it a little bit complex because you need to bring more people into the tent, but on the other hand it becomes more powerful. But I'm certain that I think that you're entirely justified to be skeptical and say that I'm not certain whether it's going to happen, but ultimately I think that, and this is also why I was appealing to the people below 35, because ultimately they need to give meaning to their careers. They need to give meaning to their work and say, like, when they go home in the evening and say, look, have I done something useful? That we say, like, here is an agenda which is presenting itself. It's not a done deal, but you have the opportunity to make it happen. So I think jointly we are responsible that this does not happen, what you're afraid of.
Thank you very much. Is there any other questions? We do have one towards the back. And again, gentlemen, I might ask you to come back on stage.
This is a question for Corny. Corny, you said that Walk21 needs to create a bridge to the Sustainable Development Goals. What are some practical ways that people in this room might be able to do that?
I'm happy that you did not ask what is the most important thing to do, because that's always the most lethal question in any seminar. What are practical ways that you can do this? I think you need to find out who in your country or who in your city is has the mandate to follow up on the SDGs. That you need to know those people, you need to befriend those people, and you need to work with those people. There is a part of the agenda of the Sustainable Development Goals is that each year there is a meeting in New York where they are tracking progress for some of the Sustainable Development Goals. The Sustainable Development Goal 11, which is on cities, and 11.2, which is on transport, will be discussed and reviewed in New York in 2018. So if Maureen says that they are doing the second study on walking in Hong Kong, so I would suggest and I would recommend that you position yourself in such a way that you say, like, we are ready to present this in New York in the lead up to the review of 11.2. Jim spoke about 5,000 people who had signed the charter. So again, like, you need to find what are the pressure points in the international system that you can use to mobilize your stakeholders. Jim and Bronwyn cannot go to their 5,000 people every week and say, you need to do something. But if you lead it up and that you say, look, we have a campaign which will lead up to September 2018, and we will ask you to engage. That's a possibility. Every 5 years, heads of states will meet in New York to review the Sustainable Development Goals. The first time that they will do so is in 2019. So you start in 2018, and you have another shot in 2019. The same way as for this conference, that Civic Exchange used the conference to raise awareness for walking in Hong Kong, and by organizing a lot of events through your 5,000 people who have supported the International Charter, is you can organize clusters, you can organize groups and say, like, we are intending to make certain that the voice of walking is heard at the global stage. And so then you can also pitch in there. So there are various ways and means of doing that. And the nice thing is that a number of these years are still 2 or 3 years out. So that you have chance to prepare, and everything does not have to be done in 2 weeks.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Connie. You can now sit down. Take a rest. Thank you very much indeed, ladies and gentlemen. Just want a quick reminder on the Friday workshops. Feel free to sign up towards the entrance of this part of the exhibition centre first come, first served basis for a lot of these walks, and I would highly recommend you choose one of the 35 walks if you do get time and you're staying in Hong Kong through the rest of the week. It's coming up to 4 o'clock. It's time for a coffee break. If you're going to leave your items on the chairs, please do be careful, just because you never know, somebody could pinch it. Just want to make sure everyone's okay. I won't take anything, I promise. And also, if you have anything that is lost, there is a room, I think it's 230. It's our secretariat, and if you have anything that is lost, it may have been brought to our secretariat. So don't worry, lost or stolen. Thank you very much indeed for now. Grab yourself a coffee.